let's go ahead and bring in a friend of mine who's this all is happening last minute. All of our guests on our show is given to you thanks to StreamYard. StreamYard Studios, a proud home of the TNC Sports Talk YouTube channel, where you can create podcasts, videos, host virtual business meetings, and even conduct interviews. Check out their free version today at StreamYard.com. All right, let's welcome in at this time my guest. Oh, he's going to get himself situated. So we'll actually be bringing on Steve Barber, the host of the Armchair Booking Wrestling podcast and the host of Cubicle Chat. As he gets ready, we actually last minute he called me on to his podcast. He was like, I'm going to do a podcast about this weekend. There's a big hype about what's going to happen here tomorrow afternoon. And he was like, listen, let me, hey, why don't you join me? It's like, this isn't really my expertise on this subject. It's like, no, don't worry about it. We'll bring you on. And we actually had a really good recording. I'm pretty sure he's working on uploading it right now. But let's bring in Steve. Steve, how you doing today?
Doing all right, Justin. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been seems like we've been crossing each other's paths quite often. I actually enjoy it very much so. But you actually texted me earlier this morning about a pretty impactful game in the sports world coming up this weekend, and that is the Duke versus North Carolina. And we just did a show on Cubicle Chat, your podcast. I was telling everyone about, but kind of explain to me, if you don't mind, the history between Duke and North Carolina.
Duke, man, come on, Tar Heels forever. But but Duke and North Carolina, they are actually two of the most winningest programs in NCAA college basketball, men's college basketball. They have been playing each other since 1920. We actually were discussing that on Cubicle Chat, and they have played each other. This will be the 261st meeting. Right now, North Carolina does have the edge. I don't actually have the record for, but they have the edge by actually quite a bit. But this is, to me, is the biggest sports rivalry in all of
143 to 117.
I don't. Well, it was 143. I don't think the other. You know what? I do have it in my notes though from the show earlier. I should have had them up. 143 to 117. Yeah, you're right. 143,
Hey.
117, North Carolina. And just to explain why this is such a big rivalry, because, well, for one, the two teams, they're part of Tobacco Road, which includes North Carolina Duke, North Carolina State, and Wake Forest. They're part of the Big Four ACC team, the Atlantic Coast Conference teams right there in North Carolina. The two schools are only located 10 miles driving, and that's along Highway 15501. Also, the Durham Chapel Hill Boulevard is another name for it, but most people in North Carolina know it as 15501. And they're 10 miles driving, 8 miles in a straight line. Once in each college's respective arenas, in the Dean Smith Center, also known as the Dean Dome, at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and then at the Cameron Sports Arena, the Cameron Indoor Sports Arena at Duke University. And these two teams, when they play, of course, in the Atlantic Coast Conference, well, when they go, they're not just playing for the conference championship. These two schools are usually in contention for the national championship, because North Carolina currently has, actually, I got to tell you, you just spelled cubicle wrong, but it's all right. It's Cubicle chat.
Oh my goodness, I am so sorry.
Oh, you're fine. It happens, but they are in contention for national championship, because North Carolina currently has 6 national championships under their belt. Duke actually has 5. And as far as is
that correct on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
And if you're talking about, I don't forget what I was saying. Oh, winningest programs of just any game. Currently, North Carolina is the 3rd highest ranked of all time. Duke is 4th. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, they are always just butting that they've both been in the top 10. To put that in a little bit of perspective, the next closest two teams that have played each other while they've both been in the top 10 has only done it 15 times. And ironically enough, it's North Carolina and North Carolina State, because North Carolina State they used to be a powerhouse too. Don't forget about them. But, and also, there was actually something else that I was going to mention. Oh, in 2020, the year 2021, when they played each other that year, it was down years for both teams. Neither one were actually in the top 25 when they played. The last time that had happened was 1955. So you're talking 64 years, 64 straight years that whenever they played each other, at least one of them was in the top 25. And you're talking a in the NCAA tournament. North Carolina has 131 wins. Duke has 118. North Carolina is actually in the lead on that. Technically they're tied with Kentucky, but Duke is third, 118. As far as like just NCAA appearances overall, I mean, let's see, just the appearances. North Carolina is second overall behind Kentucky with 52. Duke is number 5 with 45 appearances. I mean, and which it might not sound like a big number, but Kentucky only, they have 60. So, right. They're always in the tournament right now. The tournament appearance streaks, North Carolina has the second highest with 27 straight years being in the tournament. Duke has the fourth highest with 24 straight years. So, I mean, these are two just absolute, they're part of, I don't know if Duke is considered blue blood. They might be. Because I know North Carolina and Kentucky, Kansas, I know they definitely are considered blue bloods, and I'll bet, I'll throw Duke in there as well, as much as what I don't like Duke. But I mean,
we talked about this, and we talked about the rich history, but we talked about not just the battle that they put on the field, because trust me, they have some pretty aggressive, games, throughout their lifespan, but we talked about on your podcast about the class that they had, class that they have outside of the court, and what it means. And I just when you compared a lot of great things, a lot of great games, or a lot of great rivalries, sometimes they don't have that class outside the actual sport. So to see Duke, North Carolina, I think that's just on a different level.
Yes, because I mentioned on the show, man, it does kind of transcend sports. Because when we're talking, thankfully, a lot of the people who support both teams also understand it is just a game. Because I mentioned when the young lady, at the time she was the president of the student body president of the University of North Carolina. Well, unfortunately, she was actually basically kidnapped, forced to withdraw money out of her ATM, and then she was killed. And they caught the guys, thankfully, who did it. But the next game, just a few days later, just happened to be North Carolina traveling to Duke to play at their court. Well, Duke actually had, and it was a joint thing, but it just happened to be held at Duke. They had a joint memorial service, for this young lady, who was murdered. Right. And then when Dean Smith, of course, a long time coach for North Carolina, when he passed away, just happened to be the next game, just happened to be also at Cameron. And, so they did the same thing. They also had a memorial service for Dean Smith, because it showed how much the two teams, when they are on the court against each other, it's no punches pulled. I mean, they're all in it because they're in it to win it, because this is their biggest rival. But at the same time, when Mike Krzyzewski, of course, a long time, probably the most famous coach of Duke, and he's also right now the winningest coach of all time in men's basketball, he passed up Dean Smith to get that, and of course he just kept adding to his win total. And when he went to the funeral for Dean Smith, he actually put on a Carolina blue tie, not a Duke blue, but Carolina blue, in honor of Dean Smith. So this rivalry, I mean, in 2006, the game that they played in March, because they always play the first part of February, then the first part of March, and it's the last regular season game for both of these teams. So sometimes it's the last regular season game for all of NCAA men's basketball a lot of times. But the game was broadcast on ESPN, and it's still, from what I was reading, it is still the highest viewed game of any sport ever on ESPN. And you think about all the things that ESPN shows.
Yeah.
This includes, I mean, you're talking playoff, NFL playoff games. You're talking, of course, a lot of college basketball. You're talking, just other regular season games that are very, very wanted, I guess. People are expecting a big viewership, and that game. I mean, of course, that year North Carolina was the defending national champs because they won the championship in 2005. They were defending national champs, and it was Tyler Hansbrough. It was actually his freshman year, and so this was like the highest viewed game of any event on ESPN, and so it shows how much of a rivalry this game has, because the fact that both teams are always in national, use 99% of the time they're both in national championship contention. No other rivalry can say that. And I'm talking like, and I live in Ohio, and I'm going to have to switch cameras here because it's starting to act up on me. And the there we go.
There we go.
I don't like this camera as much, but you know what? Hey, so be it. But since I live in Ohio now, of course, everybody talks about the Ohio State, and the team up north is what they call it. But I'll say it's Ohio State and Michigan. Michigan, who just won the national championship in football. They say, well, that's a great rivalry too. And I'll say, well, not really, because Michigan had a lot of down years, when Ohio State was one, but then vice versa. They're not both in the national championship talk every single year. Alabama, Auburn, same thing in football. They're not both in the national championship talk every single year, and what some of the other ones, I mean, even some of the rivalries out on the West Coast. I mean, you have UCLA and USC, which is a great rivalry. Don't get me wrong, but neither one of them are usually in the national championship. And then when you go professional sports, I try not to think, I mean, and I know there's some big rivalries in professional sports, because, I mean, you have the Yankees and the Red Sox. You have, right now, like we mentioned, the Patriots and the Colts was kind of big for a while, but that was not Drew Bledsoe, Brady and Manning, but that's kind of fizzled out.
I mean, I grew up, the Chargers and the Raiders. I mean, when the Raiders were down in LA, that was, because of all the history they've had, that was a big feud. Right. We're talking to Steve, host of Armchair Booking Wrestling Podcast and Cubicle Chat. You can check out his latest episode. Has it been posted already?
Yes.
Okay, so you can check out his later today. What is the title of it?
The title is, make sure I get it right.
Is it Duke versus North Carolina?
Something similar. North Carolina and Duke. That's all I named it. Very simple title. Okay. Yeah, just
very simple. Because that is the game this weekend, probably one of the biggest games in NCAA college basketball. Probably this weekend. This also starts setting the tone for what we could see coming into the March Madness Nerd Tournament, which is about a month away. They play tomorrow night, February 3rd, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, available on ESPN. It's the ranked number 7 Duke Blue Devils taking on the number 3 North Carolina Tar Heels. Now, I do want to ask, I was looking at some of the reports and some of the previews, we mentioned this on your podcast, but North Carolina has dominated. They just got off of a 10-game winning streak. They ended up losing on Tuesday, 74-73 against Georgia Tech. But Duke at the same time, right? And this is what makes this rival and this game coming up, game tomorrow, so interesting to watch. Because despite of multiple injuries, they've won 3 in a row, and 11 of their last 12. Duke has won their last 4 road games, including the victory against Virginia Tech on Monday, 77-67. So, you as a Tar Heel fan, are you worried? I mean, yeah, you came off the long streak, but are you worried as a fan that Duke may have that upper advantage on the road?
When it comes to Duke and North Carolina, honestly, anything can happen. And because if you look in the past history, I mean, there have been times where, I know a few times North Carolina was actually not ranked, and they walked into Cameron Indoor and they knocked Duke out. In fact, Coach Mike Krzyzewski, his last game at Cameron Indoor, of course, was against North Carolina. It was the final game of the season, the way it always is. And because it was his final regular season game, they had it there at Duke. Carolina walked in and beat Mike Krzyzewski on his home court in his very last home game. And North Carolina did that. That was the year, ironically enough, they actually were the national runner-up that year. This was just 2 years ago, 2022. And North Carolina also, they were pretty close to not even making the tournament that year. That was actually a down year for them. Not like last year was a really down year for them. They didn't even make the tournament last year, the big tournament, which is rare. But then that year also in the Final Four was the only time North Carolina and Duke have ever met each other in the NCAA tournament. And Mike Krzyzewski's last game, not just last home game, last game, they beat him. And so I mean, and of course Duke. Well, I mean, they were heavily favored. Didn't matter. I mean, it was the Final Four, but Duke was very heavily favored. They had a 4 seed. Now, North Carolina had an 8 seed.
Since our recording, I do see North Carolina has the -5, and the over/under is 151.
Okay,
so
they must have just updated that. Let me look on.
I just saw that. I've updated. So I'm on the website right now. All this is coming from CBS Sports. I think I like CBS Sports. But you know, Tar Heels for life. So I guess there's a little bit of a biased opinion. For me, I'm about a good basketball game. I've been watching the last couple of Xavier games, including this past one where they came back after being down from St. John's for the entire game. They came back. They ended up winning. And I thought this was like an incredible win for them. They had a win a couple weeks ago. It was 92-91. I forgot the team who they were playing against. It was
Xavier.
Yeah, Xavier. I don't know who they were playing against, but man, it was they're at home, and it was such a great game. Like it just motivates you to wanting to watch college basketball for. And tomorrow night we're going to get a treat. 6:30 p.m. ESPN. Number 7 Duke taking on number 3 North Carolina. Anyway, the last question, I'm gonna leave it to you. Do you have a prediction on the point spread for this?
Oh,
it's gonna be high scoring, low scoring. It's gonna be a blowout. Well, hopefully it's a blowout for you, right?
I mean, I always want North Carolina to have a blowout, but usually their games are always close. Do you know? There's Duke's way, and you know that's always a horrible thing for me being a North Carolina fan. And but I mean the games. I mean they're always intense. Oddly enough, I will say the games are actually more intense when they play in Cameron Indoor because it's a smaller arena.
Yeah,
because Cameron Indoor it only holds like 5,000, whereas the Dean Dome I want to say holds closer to 20. Right. And so I mean it's a little more intense there just because it's smaller.
Right.
But I never try to predict anything in theirs because, I mean, anytime they play Duke, I do worry, but at the same time, I'm still confident, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And because both teams are going to be putting on their best. They're both going to be very intense. They're going to be, given 110% because of who they're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys, I mean, we even talk about this. It's actually come out. I mean, and they admitted that during like their off time, a lot of times they will actually travel and play pickup games with each other.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and that's, not on a court, that's just, not on a formal court, not, in the Dean Dome or Cameron Indoor, but like on like an outdoor court in a park somewhere, and they're just playing pickup games. And it's not necessarily, okay, we're still Duke and you're still Carolina. I mean, they'll mix it up and, maybe like 4-on-4, 3-on-3,
right.
where it has a mixture of the players on the both teams. And so, but yeah, it is a rivalry that it's hard to match it. There's actually been books written about it. There was a congressman. I didn't mention this on the podcast, but I should have. He was big Tar Heel supporter. And he actually said, I'll say it again. He said, if it came down to Duke playing the Taliban, I'll have to cheer for the Taliban.
Gosh, this is good stuff. I think, listen, Duke and North Carolina is just the tip of the iceberg of what, rivalries can become over the years. But Steve, hey, listen, I want to thank you for your time coming on the show. Be sure to check out Steve Barber over there at Armchair Booking Wrestling Podcast. I forgot the the podcast part. But at Armchair Booking Wrestling Podcast, uploading weekly. I think we just did You just had an episode with BC Hunter a couple of days ago, and then that was
BC
actually the Royal Rumble preview post
review.
review.
BC Hunter from Wrestling with the 80s. He actually he's video only. Great show. BC. He's actually out of Nova Scotia, Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very familiar with that place through television, of course. But you can also follow his Steve's other podcast, Cubicle Chat, which you could now check on the latest podcast of Duke in North Carolina, available on all audio platforms. So be sure to follow his social media accounts, and you just contact him personally. He'll just get you in the right direction there. But Steve, hey, thank you so much for taking the time joining us here talking some Duke and North Carolina basketball today.
Oh, well, thank you, Justin. If you want to hit up my show or shows, Armchair Booking Wrestling Podcast at Gmail or Cubicle Chat Podcast at Gmail, just hit me up. I keep listening to the TNC Sports Talk because Justin puts his heart and soul into every episode, and he talks about things that he's a fan of, and you can tell because the passion just comes through. So thank you again, Justin, for having me on, and thank you for coming on my show and shows, actually multiple.
No worries. You have a great rest of your day.
All right, dude. We'll see you.